When it hit me that Gravity Falls was on the cusp of being 10 years old earlier this year, I fell deep into a revisit of everything I loved about it. Now, Gravity Falls is one of those things that is always in the back of my mind somewhere. I take any opportunity to reference it, or joke about it, or make examples out of it. And yet, all of that is only the superficial layer of the show's relevance to me. Its real staying power, the reason I always come back to it, was something else entirely, something more. There has been so much analysis and discussion about this show over the years. Its mysteries, puzzles, and humor, its characters and their dynamics with one another, its animation, design, and visual appeal, the sense of discovery, and a level of community engagement unlike anything else out there, and so much more. I could talk about any of that, all aspects that I love as much as anyone else. But what made Gravity Falls so special to me is an overarching thematic core that you can find in every episode of the show's 2-season run. I won't be the first, or last, person to say that Gravity Falls tells an extremely heartfelt, emotional, and timeless story, under all of its goofy antics and lovable dynamics. But I will say that the way it reaches that point, maybe even the reason it's as good as it is how it portrays the twins so naturally, so lovingly warm and sentimental, that the strength of the threads that bound them together is commented on, both within and beyond the show itself. Even as, like the light cast from the sun on a summer day, the brighter the bond in the present day, the darker the shadow it casts upon the future.
Making the twins actually like each other was the fundamental bedrock of the series.
Anything can go wrong between them, but or they get in fights or something bad can happen, but if all that falls away, they will always have each other's back.
They like each other. They're also so familiar with each other, they know the other person will forgive anything. So Dipper can just do this to Mabel, right? Mabel can just do that, and they don't care, right? That's the thing you have when you're twins. I think if you're older, younger, younger sibling does this, and they're like, what's wrong with you?
Stop it.
But we don't care. Yeah, there's just a degree of comfort, meaning you can be your real self, and then you can get annoyed, and then you can forgive immediately. Since then, there's been so many people who have come out and be like, oh, thank you for making a show that shows a positive sibling relationship, because I think it's weirdly rare, and it just came from trying to be inspired by the spirit of the reality of what I remembered.
That clip from the box set documentary, The Hirsch Twins, is pretty much a perfect expression of what I felt and saw in Dipper and Mabel's relationship throughout the show. Gravity Falls, at its heart, is a story about the Pines twins, exploring the wacky, fun adventures they have over the summer, uncovering the mysteries of the town, being taught important lessons about both the world and themselves, experiencing all of the tender moments in between, and just generally enjoying their lives, in that window of transition between their childhood and teenage years. All of those episodes together are invaluable in building this intimately real, extremely close bond between Dipper and Mabel that flows even through their personal quirks and flaws. Each ends up feeling like the natural other half of their twin. They work through the circumstances thrown at them together, take care of and look out for each other, and love simply being in each other's company. Really, the two could be going through something as major as a literal zombie apocalypse, like in the Season 2 premiere of Scarioki, and still end up doing those dumb things you love with the people you love. Those experiences that we remember years later. And, as unorthodox a choice as it may be, that episode is actually one of my personal favorites for just that very reason. It's the Pines twins at their closest and most natural. The pure enjoyment and warmth of something as silly and heartwarming as terribly singing stupid karaoke together to overcome a literal apocalypse. It's front and center in a show filled to the brim with countless moments where, to echo what the earlier clip alluded to, their sibling bond sets itself apart from the dynamic that some other stories tend to go for, where it feels that siblings annoy each other or act like they dislike each other, or some other form of, gah, they're my family, but I just can't stand them sometimes. No, Dipper and Mabel are clearly shown to love each other, truly, genuinely, and they have a very healthy, positive relationship throughout Gravity Falls. At the same time, though, there are fault lines and an underlying subtext that adds depth and a dimension of imperfection to their relationship. The twins are very different, following different trajectories in their development as people. Where Dipper is curious and analytical, Mabel is creative and artistic. Where Dipper is rational and adventurous, Mabel is free-spirited and magnetic. And, on a much more fundamental level, time and again, Dipper is open and willing when faced with a shadow of change, trying to alter the way everyone around him sees him, abandoning sibling tradition on a whim in favor of doing something that makes him look older, moving against people in positions that he's been warned against, even being swayed by really shoddy relationship advice against his own better judgment as he tries to move past his own feelings, while Mabel tends to remain in the realm of their world as it's always been, a romanticized idealization of this stage of her life, a structured and predictable progression towards a fantasy that only exists in her mind, how she thinks she should behave, and, in some cases, holding on to childhood experiences she won't be able to have much longer, or trying to go backwards and deny the things that have changed her. And that is the core of Gravity Falls. Every day, every new person they meet, every wacky experience, every crazy adventure, every video miniseries created and moment of growth and mystery deciphered is all in the context of oncoming change for the Pines twins. It's watching Dipper and Mabel come up against the transformative reality of growing up, and the steady march of time, guiding their divergent paths towards an event horizon more quickly than either of them could have ever realized it would. There is a single moment where that event horizon could be clearly observed by all, as the twins rationalize the enigma of Stan Pines, yesterday's lie and the imminent truth. Suspended in a transient balance between gravitational poles, exert their own influences on the centers of mass that are Dipper and Mabel. In the halls beneath the facade of the shack, both forces approach the mystery in the only way they've ever known how, their worldviews forming the essence of their behavior. Dipper, facing ahead and questioning to the very end, accusing and denying the unknown without fail. Trust no one, trust no one, trust no one, like a siren blaring through his mind, as he seeks to embrace their change in view towards the Elder Pines. Mabel, looking back and pursuing vindication of the lives they'd known, desperate for sincerity, even when faced with dishonesty. She wishes in perpetuity for anything that could link the two realities she knew, something that would let her trust and believe in the world that had been. It is, in the end, the shooting star that takes the first step over the line, and out beyond the event horizon, approaches the path to the singularity. Stanley and Stanford Pines, thematic and character parallels to the twins, are a chasm of damaged familial bonds that, in turn, impose themselves and their pasts upon Dipper and Mabel. But as summer draws ever closer to its end in Gravity Falls, the bubbling cauldron of circumstances and problems that led to what ended it all doesn't just come from them. It's something that all four contribute to. Dipper and Stanley align to each other here, enough to where their similarities guide them into conflict. On the surface, they're both deeply stubborn and determined people, which, when they do disagree, means that neither ever backs down. Under that exterior, though, deep down, Dipper and Stanley both struggle with insecurity and vulnerability. They're uncertain by nature and dependent on others, which leads them into feeling intense loyalty towards those that earn their trust and affection, manifesting in Stanley as decades of dedication to saving his estranged twin, and undisguised bitterness when his efforts result only in thankless rejection. That feeling is projected onto Mabel as the idea, envious as it was, that her twin would always be beside her, no matter what happened. Meanwhile, those shared flaws are also the reason that Dipper is so susceptible to Stanford's influence. He practically worships the figure of the author as his personal hero, wants to do whatever he can to prove both his accomplishments and his potential, which places him in a deferential position to the much larger shadow that Stanford casts. So when Ford finally does acknowledge his efforts, and begins to project the weight of his broken relationship with Stanley onto the twins like an axe forcing its edge between them, Dipper falls under the sway of his attitude, ideas that had never been in the nature of his bond with Mabel. On his own, Dipper wouldn't have hidden the existence and importance of the rift from her, nor did he ever view their closeness as suffocating, or her presence as an obstacle. Just as with Bill Cipher, an outside force swaying his heart leads Dipper into an unnatural position. But crucially, the scenarios that arise are only able to burn because they expose adjacent problems the twins face that do need to be solved. For the Pines twins in the final stage of their summer, that boils down to a question that the projection of both Stanley and Stanford reveal together. What does their sibling bond mean to them? What should it mean? In Mabel's case, this question hits right at the heart of Gravity Falls' core pillars of family and change. What we see in Dipper and Mabel versus the future isn't something that comes barreling in. It's the entire series being thrown back into her face by the context of a new reality. It's the sudden, jarring, and crushing realization that all of those fun summer adventures that you had with those friends that you could be yourself around, that knew and understood you better than almost anyone else out there, that indulged in every interest you shared time and again, weren't going to be around anymore. It's the feeling you face when you look at the future that you always took for granted, examine it in detail, and discover that what you thought lay ahead wasn't actually there, that things will never again be as they are right now, as they've been for all this time. It's the way your world can feel like it's crumbling if you stand to lose someone that you've known forever, who's always been a constant in your life, no matter what, who shares a connection with you, closer than words could ever describe, who supports and defines you just as much as the reverse. All of it changing so abruptly that you could never hope to have enough time to process it before, almost as soon as you realize it, it's already coming to pass. It may not be a new sentiment, but it's a feeling that we know all too well. The world continues to turn, the flame continues to burn. The thought of change, the fear and uncertainty of the unknown, the comfort of everything just remaining as it is right now, because moving forward would take you off the steady, reliable path. It can be absolutely parasitic, eating away until it leaves you frozen. As time went on, after the conclusion of the series, the echoes of Mabel's struggle resonated ever stronger, something that was definitely enhanced by the fact that I was the same age that they were, when they were. I practically grew up alongside the twins, right in the middle of facing the same things that they were facing, all the years that I watched the series. The sum total of this entire concept falls hard upon Mabel, as it tears her completely out of her element by its very nature, while exposing where her habits take her when she's set adrift. She is a girl that typically exudes self-confidence, so much so that, at times, she can become extremely self-absorbed. She loves to be the center of attention in the room, or the star of the show, and whenever her core conviction is shaken, that part of her is what lashes back in its place. On balance, say when Dipper is conflicted about something, Mabel's solution tends to be to listen to her, because she does everything right all the time. She tends to overlook what Dipper wants and suggests, in favor of what she thinks his best course of action is. But when she's knocked off balance, during the moment that ended it all, she leans hard into the way the circumstances at hand would impact her as her way of trying to steer them both onto a course where they won't lose each other. She does what she believes is for his own good, or their own good, out of genuine kindness and empathy for her twin, yes, but colored by her nature, much like Stanford himself does. Neither understand that their assumptions aren't right, and that their solutions aren't wanted or desired. And this is why the unequal, manipulative dynamic that Stanford has with Dipper could never work with Mabel. Even beyond the total absence of hero worship, she thinks that her way is always the best way, and that would be something that she and Ford would always be at odds over. She wouldn't depend on his ideas and views the way that Dipper does, because of her own independence. Or, to put it another way, she wouldn't put up with the attitude that drives Stanford after his return, and he wouldn't put up with hers, because he also tends to think that his way is the best way. And in a wider sense, that attitude is deeply disruptive to both the Pines twins and his own brother. When he steps back into the picture, their lives begin to spiral in line with what he believes. From his initial introduction, Stanford is embittered, angry, and resentful. He holds Stanley's mistakes over his head like a seal of eternal judgment, refusing to see his twin as anything but the caricature their father described. Caught up in his own egotistical fantasy and his reclusive tendencies, he immediately retreats into his own secluded research beneath the Mystery Shack, spending the majority of his time refusing to allow his family in, metaphorically and literally, leaving the two Stans' dysfunctional relationship to hang over the Pines twins. Trust no one is his mantra. It's how he justifies turning away from his strained relationship with his brother for so long, even after the impact of his mistake vanished completely. Focusing exclusively on that one action, even into the final days of the summer he returned to. It's how he can so readily shut Mabel out of the loop of the Rift's existence without much further consideration, forcing an unnatural breach between the twins, and leaving Mabel with no way to know the true nature of the danger it presents. And it's how he can appeal to Dipper's biggest personal flaw so enthusiastically as he strides past the entirely unnecessary damage his proposals will do to Dipper and Mabel's relationship on both sides, as well as to the twins personally. The apprenticeship offer is, in the end, the single most damning expression of all of Stanford's flaws and impact, all rolled into a single idea. Throughout the entire series, Dipper has expressed one overwhelming desire: to grow up, and to do so far too quickly, attempting to skip over his childhood entirely, going as far as trying to join a government investigation, kicking aside his age, his maturity, everything. Along then comes Stanford, offering him exactly that at his most captivated and malleable moment. To Dipper, Ford appears to be exactly the adult that he wants to be, but in reality, he's someone who, to quote from Alex Hirsch directly, wanted to be the man at the expense of all other people, and it ruined his life. Stanford is simply too personally flawed at this point in the series. He's someone who is obsessed with the prestige of his own genius and potential. First taken in by the idea of being destined for greatness, then by the allure of the distinguished place he thought his grand theory of weirdness would earn him among the celebrated figures of history, and ultimately by the thought that he would be the one to end Bill. He pursued that goal with a drive so fanatical that he utterly rejected Fiddleford pleading with him to publish his research, take his life back, and move on from a fixation that was destroying both him and his ability to connect with others. He insists upon an experiment that traumatizes Fiddleford while prioritizing his own vain glory, is easily swayed by Bill's appeal to his egotistic delusions of destiny, and more than anything else, repeatedly degrades his relationship with his twin, choosing at every turn to deepen the wound between them, taking their father's lead in disowning Stanley rather than working through a terrible and unintended mistake, reuniting only to weaponize their old dream and salvage his prided research rather than eliminate the source itself and confide in his brother, alienating Stanley and immediately establishing that he would be cast out again by Summer's End, rather than acknowledging Stanley's lifelong effort to rectify the consequences of what he'd done, or attempting reconciliation in any form. In taking the apprenticeship, Dipper would grow up in an environment fundamentally at odds with his needs. It's taking him out of a healthy, stable social setting where he's free to grow, learn, and change at a steady pace during the most impressionable time of his life, and placing him into Stanford's world. Ceaseless ego-driven experimentation, isolation with a man who puts little value on social connections, an atmosphere of distrustful paranoia, and in a general sense, a lack of opportunity for self-discovery. Dipper, at 12 years old, would be put on a fast track to the same personal exceptionalism, underdeveloped social awareness, and emotional pitfalls that led Stanford down the path to Bill's Cipher. Not only would delaying the offer until Dipper matures in his own way be a more reasonable solution for the mental health of the twins, it would also give Ford critical time to solve his own unresolved internal and external issues. But he didn't take that route. Instead, he decided to cast it upon the twins at the very end of the summer, with no time for consideration, forcing a breach between them that could have been avoided. which is why, where a lot of fans wanted more time with Stanford during the final stretch of the show, or thought that his return should have happened sooner, I actually think that the themes of the show are advanced in a really unique way, by how condensed it all is. In the same way that something like Majora's Mask became a machine all its own, that's endlessly theorized and talked about because of its limitations, it feels like the end of summer comes as abruptly to the audience as it does for the Pines twins themselves. One minute, they're still hopping from mystery to mystery, or going to an unforgettable party, and the next, the whole context of their family is radically different, and everything they'd known was about to change, no matter what they did. And that's exactly how it can feel sometimes. If they had more time, maybe the family could have broken down Ford's walls, and they could have had more moments together. Maybe Dipper and Pacifica could have grown even closer, or the Stans could have found a way to mend their fractured relationship. Maybe Mabel could have come to terms with the end of childhood. So much wouldn't have been put on their shoulders all at once, while they were still just learning how to navigate this new reality and maintain some feeling of normalcy. But neither they nor we had that luxury. That's just how things are sometimes. And that makes the reality of what the Pines twins face that much more important to everything the show is. Neither Dipper nor Mabel actually wanted to grow up apart. It's Stanford that tries to force the perception that Dipper both would want to and should, so hastily that it crashes against the unresolved struggles of either wanting to grow up too quickly or not at all. Ford compels the two to face the fact that things will be changing, and what that means for them. Is their bond fleeting? Does it have to change? How should it change? What should it become? All at once, all at the same time. Given the breathing room to process and work through it, Mabel would have accepted Dipper's decision. It might have taken being sat down and made to realize the unfair nature of her selfish backlash, but she would have seen that it was something they needed to accept and adapt to, each with an understanding of where the other was heading and what they meant to each other. If you take her at her word, she wasn't even asking Dipper not to follow what he wanted to do with his life. She wished that summer, which had come to represent her childhood as it stood idealized, would be around just a little longer, or didn't have to change. She didn't want to accept that it had to, that everything keeps moving along with or without you, even though she knows its reality. That's why Bill's offer, and the subsequent bubble that Mabel's placed into, is so dangerous, and such a perfect final major obstacle to the Pines twins. It indulges the childish fantasy beyond one's wildest dreams, preys upon you with concepts antithetical to the overarching themes of Gravity Falls itself. Inside the bubble, you don't have to grow up. Things don't have to change. Everything can be this way forever, and you can have whatever outlandish thing you so desire. Inside the bubble, there is only unexamined notions, and unchallenged relationships, and unfulfilled lack of personal growth. Your perception reaches a perfect, perpetual standstill, blind or unwilling to anything that defies it. Put another way, it's a psychological trap, built to exploit Dipper and Mabel as if they were the two Stans. Because if they were, they'd be too caught up in themselves to see past the fantasy, to the heart of the mutual understanding and respect they should have. But that's not who they are. Because, despite what ended it all, they're each the most important person in each other's world. They're each other's best friend and pillar of support. Their greatest defender and most dedicated partner. The brightest point of light in their sky when they're together, and the darkest, emptiest absence when they aren't. They bring out the best their twin has to offer, and the other straightens out their path. Complementary halves of a single whole, and the perfect team. Ultimately, though, even as all this was as true in their hearts as it had ever been, Dipper did what he did because of his preconceived notions, and so did Mabel. One let the desire to skip their childhood undercut the value of the connection they shared, and the other allowed the fear of growing up and the self-centered wish for nothing to change override natural flexibility, tightening the boundaries of their relationship until they could hardly move at all. So, no, their bond doesn't have to end, but it does have to grow up alongside them. The twins are going to go down their own paths. They are equally intelligent people, but their natures lead them to express themselves in very different ways.
Yeah.
Well, I think Mabel does not have the patience for, I think I think Mabel and Dipper are of exactly equal intelligence.
Yes,
but
it's about
I think
temperament.
that Mabel does not. She's so creative and just does not have the patience for things that aren't fun.
Yeah.
And I think like Mabel is somebody who, you know, to save someone's life, she could probably get good at math, but for any other reason, she would just blow it off.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a lot of these just sort of logic type things that Mabel is like, you know, she's playing chess with Dipper and she's thinking about how cute the horses are and she loses, but she doesn't care.
Yeah.
Of
If she
course.
cared, she could beat him, but she doesn't. But she also doesn't know how to care about things like that.
And you can see this right down to something as simple as the mysterious and logical focus of Dipper's video series versus the creative, artistic, and fun focus in the series that Mabel produced. That divergence is only going to get more pronounced as the years go by, and as it develops further, they're going to be better off standing together rather than apart. But they can't be trampling on what they both enjoy doing together, or overreacting when their sibling wants to pursue something that takes them in another direction. Their dynamic must be one that is capable of adjusting to various contexts, but also mindful and sympathetic to each other's needs and wants. And that's exactly what Escape from Reality teaches them. Dipper recognizes the value of their close relationship, how far Stanford's idea of his sister suffocating him is from reality, and the danger posed by Ford feeding into his impulses at the expense of everything else, but also how to navigate the inevitability of their differences without capsizing their boat, while Mabel recognizes the overbearing reality of her domination over their bond, becoming more flexible towards the idea of future change, in recognition of what that obstinate reality was doing to their relationship, and accepting her self-centered actions for what they were. All of this by rejecting the fantasy, even audibly conceding that if Dipper still wanted to follow Stanford, she wouldn't stand in his way, even if it meant giving up what had pulled her out of it to begin with. Navigating Mabel's bubble together is their trial, and with that understanding between them, they're able to pull off amazing things, even against an entity as transcendent as Bill, standing together against anything and everything, and being the mystery twins, despite the apocalypse unfolding all around them. The Stan twins don't have that. They're too caught up in their own entrenched cynicism and worldviews to consider how the other sees a situation at all, and each fall into their old habits as a result. The two being unable to come together is what causes the failure of the Zodiac to begin with. While Dipper and Mabel are in perfect harmony, they are in tangled conflict, and it costs them dearly. Bill Cipher is a challenge to the entire Pines family. His continued existence represents their internal and external failures, as each of them made their own deals with him, in the haze of both their character flaws and their mistaken views on family. Only after both sets of twins have come to a point where they see their own flaws, how best to overcome them, and the necessity of mending the emotional rift between them, can Bill finally be brought down. That's what Weirdmageddon itself is all about. Bill didn't believe that they could come together. They'd be too flawed, too divided, and he would just be able to walk all over them, manipulate them as he always had before. The final conflict isn't a physical fight, or a prophetic banishment, but one final deal. And while the core of Stanford, Dipper, and Mabel's deals were all as Bill anticipated, when it was Stanley's turn, after the last walls between their family had finally crumbled, when his brothers saw proof that all of his preconceptions were wrong, and that it was he who stood beside a man that meant more to him and the world than anything else, when the intention behind their side was resolute sacrifice in the name of their family, that's when the scales tip decisively in their favor, and Bill Cipher comes to an end. And, to me, that's a beautiful sentiment, brought together by Stanley's memory returning, after long nights of the Pines doing nothing but immersing themselves in what family meant to them. Finally, I come back around to the end. Eventually, as much as neither we nor the characters wanted to, the final minutes of summer in Gravity Falls have to arrive, and life has to go on. The two stands have to follow through on mending things between them, committing to it together, even if the journey there will be bumpy and challenging. Dipper and Mabel have to stand before the bus and face the coming challenges of the future together, looking beyond the 3 months that changed them forever. And in that moment, I wonder where I'll be, looking back on this again in another 10 years. Every time I revisit this show, it resonates just as strongly as it ever has, maybe even more so over time. Growing up with the amount of uncertainty that I felt, the impossible situation that the past 2 years has placed me and so many people I know in, or even now, with the waters of the future growing more and more bitter by the day. Sometimes, change still makes me feel apprehensive, nerve-wracked, aversive. But then comes a certain exchange between the twins.
Ready to head into the unknown?
Nope. Let's do it.
And that sticks out to me, resonates even stronger in my mind. Acceptance of change and growth doesn't mean that the unknowns aren't still frightening, or that you even feel ready for it at all. I, personally, don't think anyone ever really can be ready for the future, even if you've convinced yourself that you are, that you've embraced every possibility. But you still have to take those steps into the future, meet whatever comes your way. Dipper and Mabel still have to step onto that bus and return home, to the next stage of their lives. Stanley and Stanford still have to step onto their ship and sail into uncharted waters, into the trials and experiences that await them. As long as the arrow of time continues to be unrelenting, you keep walking, keep finding whatever it is that allows you to go on, no matter what the future holds. Family, friends, a purpose, a goal. We do what we have to, because that's all we can do. It's all we have, in a world that won't wait for us to be ready for it. We shouldn't stay behind, lost in the memories of what was. We should move with the flow, through the reality of what is. It's hard. Sometimes, it might even seem to be that you can't find anything positive in the change that's coming. But, even if it feels that way, we are capable of making something out of whatever we're given. We can't give up, even if it feels impossible, even if it feels like there's nothing there. There is always something. Find it, however you can. Live, for the present, for the future, and find the meaning in this non-stop, kaleidoscopic storm of life.